With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.
Assalamu alaikum and good evening, everyone. Welcome to another episode of Single Muslim Live with me, your host, Maedeh Sharifi, sponsored by SingleMuslim.com, broadcasted exclusively on British Muslim TV. We are currently live on Sky Channel 752, as well as across our social media platforms on Twitter, YouTube and Facebook. Now remember, as always, you can also be a part of tonight's discussion by calling in live to the studio on 0192 423 21083. And as always, standard rates do apply, so please make sure you have your bill payer's permission. You can also ask my guest tonight any questions or give your comments on WhatsApp on 079 5079 7017 and request to be anonymous if you wish to. We're also available on our social media, so remember to send in your comments throughout the show and any questions you might have for us, and especially my guest, who I will be hosting very shortly. Today's topic is quite heavy, and we will be hosting Shaista Gori, the co-chair of Muslim Women's Network. Now, Shaista is a leading women's rights activist in the UK, so I'm very excited to have her here on the show tonight to be discussing such a heavy and massive discussion. So, without further ado, I'd like to welcome Shaista. Hello, Shaista. How are you?
Hello, I'm good, thank you.
Thank you for joining us tonight. Now, the topic of discussion is revenge porn. So I wanted to start more on, so we are going to go with the intersection of how it affects women and girls in Muslim communities. And I just wanted to know, in terms of the calls you get and the problems you deal with your network, how have you seen this problem arise across the community with your work in Muslim Women's Network?
So Muslim Women's Network, we actually run a national helpline called the Muslim Women's Network Helpline. So we've been running for about 6 years, the actual helpline has been. And every year we probably help around about, well, over 1,200 women. And most of the calls, I would say 2/3 are related to violence against women and girls. So that would be domestic abuse, honor-based violence, forced marriage, and within that is revenge porn as well. Then the rest of these sort of 1/3 is kind of, mental health issues and other issues such as discrimination, etc. Now with revenge porn, what we've noticed is it's not a huge number, but that's because most people who would be experiencing revenge porn aren't going to report it. They're going to sort of feel awkward and embarrassed. So maybe in a year we might get like a dozen calls in terms of a revenge porn. Now that might not sound like a lot, but when you think about the damage that does, it's huge. But we think it's so underreported, and actually the problem is a lot bigger than the reports that are coming through. And I suspect that very specific helplines like revenge porn helpline, they will get a lot more calls.
And in terms of, I'm just going to go back to your point about it being underreported. Do you feel like there are any specific causes to that? Because, of course, revenge porn does impact all women and girls, regardless of religious backgrounds. But do you feel like there might be an intersection with cultural barriers? And because I had a discussion before with Shaheen, and we were talking about the concept of honor, perhaps, that they might be embarrassed, or that concept in itself is what allows men to use that as like a powerful tool against these women. So what is your take on that?
Yes, I mean, I've spoken to Shaheen Taj. You're probably talking to Shaheen Taj from the Henna Foundation, and I'm sure she deals with a lot of these calls as well. Now, let's define what revenge porn is, just in case anyone is unsure. It's when anyone threatens to, or actually does, share intimate images or videos. It could be online, it could be on social media, it could be via text or WhatsApp without the consent of the other person. Now, most of the victims tend to be women, from what we're getting anyway, and the perpetrators tend to be men. However, having said that, we have had situations where the perpetrators can be women as well. Yes, culture plays a massive issue. So what we're finding through the calls is that it's not just about these posts might go online and it might be an embarrassment. There's the women are worried about, or the girls are worried about being subjected to honour-based abuse from their families. So if the families, for example, if it's a young woman who's had a boyfriend, they split up, and then those pictures are then posted online, the family would then get to find out that she's actually in a relationship, then that's going to put her at risk. Now, what we've found on the helpline is there is a massive lack of understanding with the police. So when someone rings up the police and says, I'm being threatened, I'm really worried these images might be put on social media or online, and the consequences of this could be, my family forcing me into marriage, or it could be violence. That's not taken seriously. The police don't understand the honour-based abuse risk that poses. So what we've done is we actually released a report last year called Muslim Women's Experiences of the Criminal Justice System. And what we are asking the government to do is strengthen the revenge porn law. Now, last year, the law was actually being reviewed to see how it can be strengthened. So we've made a recommendation to say that this should be a consideration in sentencing. So if the perpetrator, when they are blackmailing these women, are using the whole culture, shame and honour, and putting these women at risk of honour-based abuse, we think that that should be considered in sentencing, and the sentences should be increased. So that's what we are asking for. We don't know if that's going to happen. We don't really know what's happening with the law at the moment in terms of strengthening it. So yes, it's absolutely a huge issue. And it's not just, and we can talk about this, but it's not just, for example, the next partner. It could be someone online. You might be being catfished, or you might meet somebody online and you might not have ever met them, and you exchange pictures with them, and then they start blackmailing you and want money from you. They start using extortion. So that's called sextortion or something like that. So where actually they're trying to actually gain money from you as well.
Right. That's very interesting. I didn't know that. Now, you spoke briefly about the law, and in terms of the current law now, how does the process work? So if a woman or girl comes to your organisation and is facing this problem, what is the process?
Okay, so it's really, really important to report. Now, I think a lot of people don't report because they are worried that, if I report, this image is going to go online, so I'm actually making the situation worse for myself. But what these perpetrators are doing is they're using fear. They are hoping that person is going to be so scared and they're not going to report. But actually, there's a 2-year sentence, so you can get into trouble. There's a 2-year sentence. So I don't think people want criminal records, so they absolutely should report it. So when they come to us, the first thing, we need to try and get those images. If the images have not gone online and it's a threat, obviously go to the police. The police can then give a warning to that person or take it even further to prosecution. But if the image is online, that's really important to get them offline straight away. There's a number of steps that can be taken. If it's on social media, we recommend going to the Revenge Porn Helpline. Sometimes we make the calls ourselves. They've got very, very good relationships with the social media companies, and they can get things pulled down very quickly, much faster than we can get that done. Then there's the other issue of if, for example, things are put on other websites, and it could be, for example, there's been videos that have been put on porn websites, for example, and you want to get that pulled down, or it might be some other websites. So one of the things that can be done is, and we actually give this information on the helpline, is you can go onto and ask Google. There's a form that you need to fill out online. You need to paste the link of where the images or the videos are and ask for them to be pulled down. But what we would recommend, though, before that is approach the website or the organisation to say, look, this is without my consent, pull this down, I'm reporting it to the police, because when you fill in that Google form, they will ask, have you actually made an attempt to contact the website itself to ask them to pull it down? So it's good to try and do the things in tandem, I would say. And so you do that at the same time, and then you can get things pulled down very quickly. But what I would say is that always keep records of everything, screenshots, links, as much evidence as possible, because if you are then going to go to the police and report it, you will need the evidence, and if it's all deleted, then it's very difficult then to do, if you want to do prosecution, and then the next steps would be the person is then contacted, and it depends on the offence and what the extent of it. It can be a warning, it can go all the way to prosecution with sentences of up to 2 years.
Okay, so there is a likelihood of prosecution, and is that something that is common? Because you often get, for example, in other aspects, let's say sexual assault, where some women and girls don't report it because they feel like nothing's going to happen, or they don't have enough evidence, and the likelihood of the person being prosecuted is low. So is that the same kind of concept with revenge porn, do you find, or is it slightly different?
So the law's been around for about 5 years. There has been prosecutions, and it's probably a few hundred. I mean, I don't know the exact figures. I remember a few years ago it was about 500, so it may well be more now. I think the big problem is this, that the sentences have been too light. So sometimes people, it's usually men, but there have been women who've been prosecuted as well. And the sentences have either, sometimes they've got a warning, or they've got a suspended sentence, or if it's a custodial, it's quite a light sentence. So some new guidance came out a couple of years ago, which was saying, actually, you need to take into consideration a lot more things. For example, what was the impact on that person, on the family, impact on the children, was it a repeat offender, and give the harshest sentence possible, considering all those circumstances. So I hope, as time goes on in the next few years, we start to see much harsher sentences, but also legislation strengthened, maybe to increase some of that sentencing.
Thank you. And so you spoke about sentencing, which is an interesting point, and it's going to come back to my next question. So, like, as a community, what do you think are the steps for individuals to take to address this issue or confront it? Do we start with advocating for to refine the law? Like, where does someone begin if they do want to confront this issue in the community?
I think, first of all, do not pass images on, because sometimes what some people do is they will get an image that's been passed around and then they forward it on and they think it's funny. It's not funny. You could also get into trouble. So I think people don't realise, thinking, well, I'm not the person that started this, I'm just forwarding it on. So my first advice is, don't forward it on. And also, what some people don't realise is, so for example, some of this is happening in schools. So you might have young men that, for example, they might pass around a sexually explicit image, of a girl in the school. Now, what they probably don't realise is they're passing it around and they might be having a laugh amongst themselves. If that girl is underage, those images are classified as child sexual abuse images, and then if you're then forwarding it on, you could also then be arrested and then be put on an offenders register, and that's your whole career gone. So I think people don't think more deeply into this, and they should. So that's some advice. The other bit of advice is for people themselves. So obviously, if you're in a relationship and then you split up, and I would say try not to have images and footage taken, but that's not just the problem. We're getting calls on our helpline from older women in their 40s and 50s who've been caught out. So they've maybe met somebody online or befriended somebody on Facebook that's in Pakistan or Dubai, and then developed this emotional relationship. That person's asked for naked pictures. The woman has done that, and then the next thing you know is, by that time, over the months, they've found out everything about that woman in terms of her address, who her friends and family are on Facebook. Then they start the blackmail process. Now, the problem here is the police can't do anything about perpetrators abroad. So I would say, do not, send images, naked images of yourself to people you don't know, not even to people you know, actually. So, for example, the analogy I give is if you were walking down the street and if a stranger said to you, please give me a naked picture of yourself, you'd say no, wouldn't you? Yet you have people, strangers who you don't know, because you don't even know the face, the actual person behind the face on Facebook, asking you for these images, and you're just handing them over. So we've had situations where women have been blackmailed from Pakistan and Dubai, but unfortunately the police can't go and question those men. So the advice that we have given is you shut down your accounts, basically shut them down and block that person, and take that kind of action. And usually that works because they just rely again on fear. But sometimes, we keep talking about male perpetrators, and I want to just say there are also female perpetrators. So
and I wanted to come to that actually. Can you tell us more about that? Because for some people, it might be the first time they're even hearing this, that men can also be victims of revenge porn. So if you could just give our audience your perspective on that as well.
Sometimes, it's been women as well that are threatening to post embarrassing, they deem embarrassing pictures online. A couple of examples that come to mind that we've dealt with was actually, it was two women in a same-sex relationship, and when they split up, and then what somebody had done is created fake accounts. But in the end, the person's, realised who it was. So it's actually a woman blackmailing another woman, and they were quite young. They were teenagers, which meant that there was that risk of honour-based abuse as well. So women can be perpetrators. There was another example where, again, sometimes when the blackmail happens, it's not always sexually explicit images. So one call we had on the helpline was that a young girl was at college, a very strict family. They just about let her go to college and study, but they said, don't talk to any boys. And a picture was taken of her with a young lad, and he was standing next to her, and there was nothing, to us it would be an ordinary picture, but right. For her, it's like if my parents saw me standing that close to a boy, I would be taken out of college. So for her, the consequence, it might have been harmless to us to look at, consequences were huge for her. So then it was one of her friends who then started to blackmail her and said, look, give me money, otherwise I'm going to send this to your family, this picture to your family. So she then started to pay her friend money. Now, when she then contacted the police there said that we actually can't do anything about this because this is not classified as revenge porn because it's not an intimate image, so therefore there's nothing that we could do about it. But what they failed to understand was this, for this young woman, the consequences of that going, was honour-based abuse or being taken out of, education. So she contacted us, so we got involved. So then I contacted the police and I said, look, you need to understand that these are the consequences, but the very least you could do is contact this young woman and give her a warning. That would probably frighten her. That will put a stop to this black. Yes, you can't do anything in law, at least give it a go. And that's exactly what they did. And not only did she stop, but she actually gave the money back that she had taken from this woman. Yeah, and there's a website as well that you can actually go to. I'm just thinking if I've got it here. I probably haven't got it here. But there are websites where you can go to. It's sort of removing harmful content. So it might not be... it might not be revenge porn type of images, but we've got the information on the helplines. There might, if there is something like that you wanted removed online, that's not sexually explicit in nature, we can get that removed as well, or through another organisation.
Oh, brilliant. And actually, thank you for sharing that story. And I guess it goes back to what you said earlier on, that it's the idea of fear, and the perpetrators thrive of this concept of fear. So when you do report these cases, whether someone considers revenge porn or not, it's important to remind them you're not scared of them and you don't fear them. Now, you touched briefly kind of sort of on like the systematic side of things. And do you feel like there's, how do we resolve that? Because of course, I mean, you're pioneering in it because you give representation of Muslim women and you can add that intersection and work with the police. But do you feel like there's any other gateway where there can be improvements in the system? Because this is something, a grievance that has been shared amongst some women and activists in the community.
I think more awareness raising, that you can take action and not to be fearful and report. Definitely, I've mentioned about the law already, but I think there's another area where the law could be strengthened. So again, we've made a recommendation when we were responding to the revenge porn law consultation. We had one case actually, which was audio. So what the ex-partner had done was got the sort of voices and put it onto a pornographic video, and then that was online, and then that was then being shared. So again, when this woman went to the police and said, well, you know, this is my voice on here, well, I know the footage is not me, but this is being shared, and you know, what can be done? And again, the police were sort of, well, you know, we can't really do anything, it's not an image, it's an audio, because they've got to sort of follow the law. So it's news to us as well on the helpline. So again, we've made this recommendation that they need to not, you know, look at audio as well. So I think there's some loopholes where things can be strengthened. I think more awareness raising in schools, because I think this revenge porn starts there. I mean, you hear of cases where, you know, images are taken without consent and passed around in schools, and I think that needs to be taken seriously in schools. And I feel sometimes when things are reported in the school, I'm just wondering how seriously the teachers actually take it, whether they just sort of warn the boys and then they don't do anything, don't tell the police. They would have a duty to report the police. I think parents speaking to their children as well, and not just the girls to say, protect yourselves and don't share images, but actually boys to have more respect for women and girls. Because it does come down to that. I mean, it's that lack of respect that results in some of these bad and terrible and criminal behaviours.
Indeed, and I think it is important that you did touch on the education and school aspect of things. I'm going to rewind earlier on in the show when we did speak about the long-term consequences it has for these victims. If you could just tell our audience, based on your work that you've done directly and the calls that come into the helpline, what is the effect this has on the victim?
It's massive. It's a psychological. So first of all, it's fear of if this gets out, not just the embarrassment, but obviously the fear from the family of what might happen next in terms of violence, abuse, forced marriage. Then there's a psychological trauma. You know, the sort of depression, anxiety, so the need for counselling. In fact, the need for counselling, you know, is high already amongst, for example, Asian women. For example, if you look at the stats, and these are old stats, so we need to probably do more research, but, you know, South Asian women are 2 to 3 times more likely to self-harm or be at risk of suicide, for example, than white women. And some of this is due to, you know, the experiences they're having of abuse, and obviously this will play a factor as well. So that is, you know, a huge, you know, impact. But also another thing is, for example, something I haven't mentioned, but we get calls on child sexual exploitation, and one of the barriers for them to get out of those situations and away from the perpetrators is revenge porn. So what these, you know, when girls are groomed and you know, and these grooming gangs will sexually exploit young girls, what they are doing is they're filming them, they're taking photographs, and they're saying, we are then going to go to your family and, you know, we're going to tell your dad, and that then prevents them. So again, you know, there's that child sexual exploitation and to it as well. And obviously they will remain in these abusive situations for years and years and years and not coming out of that abuse. So that's an impact because they're being blackmailed with this footage. And we had this one example of a girl that was being abused, and then the footage went to her dad, and they were hoping that she would get into trouble with her dad. And I'm really glad the dad took that information to the police and actually reported it to the police.
Well, that is refreshing to hear. And you did mention forced marriage a few times so far. I just would like you to just elaborate for the purpose of the audience. What is the link between revenge porn and forced marriage? Is it that the parents think, now like the girl, the woman's caused shame and now we need to marry her off? Like, how does the link actually unfold between revenge porn and forced marriage?
Well, if for example, the footage, images are seen by family members, and they think that the young woman is not in a relationship, and they're maybe thinking that it will be an arranged marriage, even if they're thinking that the person may find someone themselves, and then they see these images, they might think, well, are we going to be able to marry our daughter? It could be that might be mindset, or it could be what will people say, or it she's gone off the rails, even though she hasn't gone off the rails. It's a relationship that's broken down and she's been blackmailed, but they won't see it like that. So they think the solution would be, right, we're going to fix this, with a forced marriage, and then the threat of then forced marriage will be there. I mean, so for example, I had one case. I was doing a talk in a college, and this talking about these issues actually, and she came up to me afterwards and she goes, "Can I speak to you?" And she told me her story. And what happened with her was, she had met somebody, who was maybe 10 years older, and she thought he was single actually, and started having a relationship with him. So in her mind, she was having a relationship with this man to marry this man. Unknown to her, he was married with a young child, which he managed to keep hidden. Then eventually she found out that he was married, so she ended the relationship to say, well, no, actually, I want to end this and go into somebody else so I can have a relationship to get married to somebody. What then the man started to do was, he'd had all these images and videos, and he said, if you do not remain in this relationship, I am then going to send this to your family, your dad, your brothers. So what he wanted to do was continue in his marriage with his kid and have her as the girlfriend forever, and for her not to have a life of her own. And what he was doing was blackmailing her, with these videos. But her worry was then that if this information then went to her parents, that she would then lose the opportunity of then trying to find somebody else. They would think, right, that's it now, we're taking you abroad, we are going to marry you off. So that's an example, really.
Right, thank you for sharing that story. That's actually very interesting, and it does actually go back to the concept of what will people say, which is quite prevalent in different communities in the Muslim community. So that is an interesting take on it. Now, revenge porn, as our guest has discussed so far, it happens in all different angles and dimensions. And Shaista, what about, does revenge porn, have you ever seen it take place, for example, within a marriage? Because this is something that I've heard from before, but is this something your network has come across before? Because I understand, sorry to cut you off, I understand from we said earlier, for example, the strangers, like not giving your naked picture to strangers, but I'm just assuming like the married woman would think like they're in some like a trustful relationship to perhaps consent to that, or often there are cases where the woman hasn't even consented and there's been a hidden camera. So there are quite a diverse range of cases and scenarios. So I'm just wondering how you might have personally dealt with these cases where they are married women.
We don't get many, but I do remember a case actually where she was in a marriage, and unknown to her, the husband was filming her, and then he was selling the videos. And then she only, I can't remember how she found out, because this case is a few years old now. But yes, occasionally it has happened in marriages, and the woman does not know where, because now you get there's all these gadgets available now where you can do secret recordings, which is quite worrying, that you could be recorded and you won't even know that you're recorded until afterwards. So I think that's probably a good thing to sort of point out to people, to be vigilant, because now the devices are so small that you can put them in glasses, in pens, in somewhere, you know. So it's not, I mean, some videos when they're done overtly, like when the woman knows that they are being done because they're in a, you know, they feel that they're in a safe relationship. But now I think that it's to be wary of your surroundings. Has something been positioned in a particular way, a pen or glasses or something like that, and maybe sort of, you know, are things being positioned in a certain way every time on a table? So I think to be vigilant about those things would be a really, really important thing to do. Even in marriage.
Quite important, and I'm glad you mentioned that, because we do live in a digital age, and like you said, it is sort of terrifying. The technology is only developing, and we've got artificial intelligence on the way. So if anything, that is a warning sign to everyone to just stay vigilant. Now remember, even though this is a heavy topic, you can still join in the discussion with me and Shaista by either calling into the studio live on 0192 4231 or you can also WhatsApp your questions to us in confidence on 079 5079 7017. Shaista will be more than happy to answer any questions you have, and you can also leave a comment on our social medias. We're available on Instagram, Twitter, Facebook, and YouTube. Now, Shaista, so we're going to dive back into revenge porn. You said something really interesting, which I'd like your personal opinion on, because this concept of what will people say and shame, I did speak with Shaheen on briefly on forced marriage. What is your personal opinion with that concept? Like, what will people say? Because this is something that is prevalent, and I actually see it, like being from in university, I saw it like this ideology, I don't know what to call it, it exists even amongst like young men and young women. So what is your personal opinion on that?
Yes, it's that's in Urdu log kya kahenge. Yeah, what will people say? I mean, it's something that people have grown up with, right from when for decades, and it doesn't seem to go away. I'm hoping that it's getting a little bit diluted with the younger generation, who hopefully, are more aware of their rights. There are more helplines available. So I do want to plug our helpline, which is 0800 999 5786. So not just ours, but there's lots of helplines available. So I think because of the laws that have been strengthened, I think people are more likely to maybe ask for help. But I think that what will people say is still there. You're worried about, what if my auntie, my neighbor, what if people, and this is the other thing, what will people say all the way abroad in Bangladesh or Pakistan or the country? What will they say over there as well? So what will people say over there? So it has this hold, over people. So I think that is probably the biggest barrier, which kind of ties in with the whole shame, because who are you when you're thinking about shame and you're embarrassed about people finding out, or what will the shame part is linked to what will people say, and who are these people? It's the auntie down the road, or it's your, sometimes it's around, so your sister's married into another family. What are they going to say? Are they going to sort of look down at her? So I think we need to probably educate on this, but I do sort of feel that the younger generation, like I know my children don't think like that, so I think it might be diluting a little bit.
And do your children not think like that because you educated them from young? What is the cause behind that? Because I think maybe some viewers might need to take notes.
I think they have a choice. They're married to a feminist. My husband is feminist, so I'm married to a feminist man. So they see that in their dad. They see in me. So
in terms of, sorry, I'm gonna let you continue. In terms of seeing that in their dad, in what aspects? If you can just give us some examples.
Well, he's very much into women's rights. He's very supportive. He'll treat, I've got a daughter and two sons. they're treated equally, I treat them equally. Right from, you know, a young age, they see the way their dad will speak to me with respect, you know, in terms of, you know, there's no abuse, there's respectful language. Even, look, in all marriages you have disagreements, but that's done in a respectful tone. So they are growing up in a household, they're seeing, well, these two people are married to each other, they're treating each other with respect. Then, of course, because of my work, so they will hear me talk about my work. If I go to events, I have taken them from a very young age, particularly my daughter, she'd come with me more to events. So they kind of see it and hear about cases. And then what I find as well, which is really good, is that they will talk about what's been happening in their educational settings. That, you know, they're not at school anymore, but they would talk up and say, look, this is what I've been witnessing. So I'd say, well, how did you handle it? You know, did you challenge that? So I would encourage them not to be silent and maybe speak up on behalf of somebody else that may be subjected to some of these things, or raise concerns, or just at least mention it to their friends. Or sometimes they'd come home and say, actually, my friends have got problems. What do you think? What do you think I should advise them? So, you know, I do think the younger generation is a little bit different, but I think I do still see problems. You know, it's not gone away. It could be another couple of generations before it's gone, but it's still there. I mean,
it's refreshing.
Yeah, and what I would probably say is, I think one of the reasons maybe why it doesn't get diluted, this is just my theory, is the fact that when you are getting married to somebody in this country, I guess, then you have a similar culture. But then if one of the partners, if one person is from here and then the spouse is from abroad, then that culture then, you know, one of the parents will end up with that culture from another country. So which means that then that, you know, what will people say, culture doesn't get diluted, it gets passed on, really. So
yeah, and I agree with that. And I feel like even with, sorry to cut you off, even when we do speak of the younger generation, like from what I've seen, those views that do remain, when you look at like, okay, their circle of friendship, everyone has that exact view. So it does kind of tie in with what you're saying, but it's refreshing to hear your family dynamic. And you said an important point about like asking and challenging the kids on how are you actually speaking up, because I feel like this year, especially like since lockdown, we've had so much activism going on, and people who weren't even interested in it before have got involved. And there was like this whole talk about performative activism, are you actually dismantling systems? So that is a very interesting and relevant point that you did give us. In terms, with diluting, I think maybe a few more generations and we can get rid of the issue. Now we'll go back to revenge porn. In terms of have you? I know you have read Mona Tahawi and other books. Considering the research you've done with these theories, is there any you'd like to share with us tonight in regards to the topic of discussion? It could be, for example, I know there's some theories that are quite deep theories, but it's like the idea that, you know, the female body is politicized, or honor is attached to the body instead of like a woman's thoughts, etc. So if you had any theories you'd like to share with us tonight, or any resources you would recommend for viewers to start with, that would be very helpful as well.
I think the thing is, I think there's that sense of wanting to control a woman's body. So whether it's, you know, from a young age, it might be your father, your brother, and then, you know, your boyfriend, your husband. So that's always there. So, you know, it's almost, you know, you need to feel ashamed of your body and things like that. So I guess, you know, in terms of revenge porn, I mean, I don't know how much of that plays a part, because look, revenge porn happens in every society, doesn't it, really? It's not just, I think we have the added layer in sort of Asian and Muslim communities, where you've got the added layer, you know, revenge, the revenge porn and blackmail. But in terms of resources, I mean, we try and address some of these issues, this one and other issues, which includes, that control of the woman's body, and how, for example, sometimes not just culture but religion is sometimes used to do that. So we do produce resources. We've got, we've put them on the Muslim Women's Network helpline, and there's a section actually called resources, and they're on there. So, and we do have one resource which is called Women's Rights in Islam, which tackles some of these issues, which is, what does religion say about a particular issue, whether it's, a woman's autonomy over her own body, her rights, her choices, her decisions, what is culture saying compared to what religion is saying, and also in that we talk about what's kind of human interpretation as well. So, women need to take control. And I think, women are doing that. You probably need a whole talk on Islamic feminism, which is a whole big topic.
Yeah, definitely. And now, Shaista, you are a Muslim women's activist, so I do have to ask you this question, which a lot of Muslim women activists have shared before, is that do you ever feel like you're kind of like in the middle between you want to confront some, not issues with Islam, but like Muslim communities, but at the same time you might be faced with that cause or what you're addressing, kind of like usurped by perhaps like right wings and used to justify Islamophobia? Do you ever feel like you're placed in the middle of like a hard place with your activism?
Yes, so sometimes when I raise concerns, I will be accused of, well, you're a political tool of the government, or if you say this, you're going to make Islamophobia worse for our communities, and we're already under the spotlight, we're getting criticized, we're getting demonized, and now you're just going to make matters worse, you're going to put Islam in a bad name. So yes, of course, I do get that. However, my philosophy is the safeguarding of women and children, well, say anybody's safeguarding really, because also young boys, can get abused as well. So safeguarding has to be prioritized over the honour of any community. So unfortunately, if it does mean that I raise an issue, so for example, when I was talking about child sexual exploitation of South Asian girls, and it was, some people say, oh, don't do this research because then you're just going to sort of say all girls are, girls are being abused in their communities. And I said, look, their safety and safeguarding has to come first before any community. And if we get criticised, so be it, because sometimes the only way you are going to get change is if it's painful. You've got to, wash your dirty laundry in public to say this is what's happening. That forces people to take action. But of course, you can do these things as sensitively as possible. So when I did that as an example, I made sure that I said, yes, this is happening here within our communities. However, this is also happening in other communities as well. But I don't have a reach into those communities to find cases in all those other communities. I can only talk about where I have a reach. So of course, it needs to be done in a really, really sensitive way. But at the same time, sometimes I'm at the same time defending communities against certain things that might be happening. There might be, for example, right-wing rhetoric. It might be even by politicians as well. And of course, when I do that, then I could get attacked by the right wing to say, oh, look, look, this is what Islam is like. And you're defending wrongdoing which I'm not. But ultimately, this is not about, when we raise concerns, it's never about demonizing Islam. It's actually saying Islam says this. Islam is about justice. So I always have to remind people that in Islam it says stand up for justice and human rights, even if it means speaking out against your own family. So who's the community? So in a way, by doing that, I'm just, following Islam. So, and I think people tend to forget that is a core value in Islam, that we've got to prioritize that, not sort of worry about what people say. It comes down to what people say. And for me, that does not stop me, really.
Yeah, and I'm happy you did touch on that core values, because I feel like that is what some people often get slipped into doing, is where they choose what values they want to believe in and if that fits in with their own agendas. But it is very empowering to hear that you do continue your work and your efforts despite all the backlash you receive from different spectrums. Now, you are quite an outspoken woman, and you do speak quite confidently, and you address issues publicly, which is very empowering to see. So for your work, do you often perhaps face online abuse or anything of that sort?
Yes, I do. Sometimes I do face that. I think it's less now online. It used to be more online abuse, and that was because I think sometimes I would then react. So if someone said something, then I would react, and I sort of realised, you know what, there's just no point. I may as well just ignore the abuse. Sometimes I've had emails which are not nice. I've had phone calls which I've had to report to the police. So sometimes I remember one time I had this phone call from a man. It's usually, I've never had any phone calls from women, by the way. It's usually men, and it's been men. I've had one or two negative emails from women, and he just left a really horrible message on the phone, which I ended up then reporting to the police. Another one, he just rang and he said, you know, how dare you call yourself a Muslim? You need to change your name. Why are you saying this? And just shouting at me down the phone. And again, I reported that to the police. So there's been a few times where I've just made reports to the police, because obviously if people keep doing that, and it amounts to harassment, which can be a whole other topic you could talk about. So if someone tries to contact you and you don't want them to contact you, it can amount to harassment, and that's against the law as well. So I've had to kind of report people so the police can ring them up and give them a warning.
I love that energy, and I think that is a stark reminder everyone does need. And you know what, reporting at the end of the day, like what it shows is that this is an issue, and you should get condemned for it. And I feel like that's just reporting it is that first step, and I'm glad Shaista has reiterated that throughout tonight's discussion. And thank you so much for sharing all the stories with us on British Muslim TV. Just one last question. You did touch on some of the comments he did leave and to your religious identity. Do you feel like being in a position as a Muslim woman activist that sometimes your religious identity can be undermined by people, or perhaps you're labelled as a liberal Muslim? Do you ever face any of these, or have faced them during your career?
I mean, it's all these labels, isn't there? You know, progressive Muslim and liberal Muslim. I just like to describe myself as a Muslim, but unfortunately, sometimes you're forced to kind of say liberal Muslim or progressive Muslim because you're trying to distinguish yourself from maybe very conservative Muslims. But I think I hate the labeling, because again, sometimes what happens is with the labels of conservative Muslims, unfortunately, they will then, you know, some people might think, oh, they're extreme Muslims, but they're not. They're just conservative Muslims. Extreme Muslim is a whole different thing. And I always believe the middle ground is the best, which again, you know, is in the Quran. It talks about being in the middle. It's, you know, you shouldn't be extreme in any way, you know, both ways. You know, you could be extremely liberal, for example, or, you know, extremely conservative. So I always say middle ground. I mean, I describe myself as if I have to describe myself, I have many identities, you know. I'm a Muslim, I'm a woman, or first, I've got a choice, born as a woman, so woman, Muslim, British, Pakistani, a mother, a Brahmi. I've been here 20 years even. So I have many identities, and I think it's not nice when you have to kind of start choosing identities and people start pigeonholing you, really, in a feminist. So I must not forget that identity. That's very important.
Lovely. Thank you for clarifying that for us. Now the show is going to come to a wrap up soon. I just wanted to ask you, so if anyone does stumble across this video or currently watching and they are going through either blackmail or the content is already out there, what would be your 3 tips for those people that are dealing with revenge porn?
First of all, use the force of the law. You know, use that as your protection. It's there to protect. Call helplines. There's help out there, our helpline, the Muslim Women's Network helpline. And I think tell somebody. I think sometimes what happens is people keep it inside and tell somebody. It could be your best friend, it could be your sister, it could be, you know, somebody at school, it could be, just tell somebody, because that somebody may put things into perspective for you, and it could be that person asks for help on your behalf. You may feel not strong enough to do that, and it's difficult not to be scared, but you know, try not to be scared, because that is the very, very thing that when it comes to revenge porn that they are banking on, for you to be scared so they can continue you know, blackmailing you.
Indeed. Thank you for those tips. And I'm a big fan of this whole fear concept. It does really set a reminder that the reason these perpetrators thrive in the first place is the idea of fear. And that goes back to any form of blackmailing. Thank you so much, Shaista, for sharing the story and your insight tonight. I was just wondering, for the benefit of the viewers, if someone did want to contact your organization, are you available on social media, and how can they contact you?
Yeah, so on Instagram it's Muslim Women's Network UK, on Twitter it's Muslim Women UK. We've got a website which is Muslim Women's Network UK. We've also got a specific website for the helpline, which is Muslim Women's Helpline. So you could email us on info@mwnhelpline.co.uk. You could, there's a free phone number, 0800 999 5786. So I would say do contact us. We've also actually got a new website we've just launched, which is called the mwnhub.com, and on there, people are more than welcome to write blogs anonymously about their experiences. They can share video content on there as well. So feel free to use all of our resources.
Indeed. Thank you for sharing those. Now, a quick question. Since we are in a pandemic, has that had any impact on the running of the organisation at all?
We've been working from home, so we've got remote working, but we've put all the systems and phones in place. There has been a rise in calls, particularly on domestic abuse. But interestingly, I've not looked at our revenge porn statistics, but I know the revenge porn helpline is reporting a 60% rise in revenge calls compared to last year. 60%, because more people are online, they're in lockdown, they're online. Yes, it's 60% according to the revenge porn helpline compared to last year.
And when will your do you have a rough estimate or deadline of when your statistics will be out, which I think will be quite beneficial for us to check out?
So what we tend to do actually, with our helpline, we have it independently evaluated every year. So we pull down the data every January. So in January, we'll look at the 2020 data. Then we strip out obviously any personal details, and all the statistics we share online. So there's a tab actually, Muslim Women's Network, and if you went to resources and helpline data, so at the moment all the data is there from 2015 to 2019, which you can then search through by region, by issue, by demographic, by ethnicity, ages, just raw statistics about what we get on our helpline, which is very useful actually. People log in to check. You have to register to log in. Academics, media, students, third sector organizations, government, people are using that data.
Right, all right then. Thank you so much. Indeed, I am kind of looking forward to looking at those statistics, and it's interesting how there is a connection between a pandemic and these crimes and problems that do arise, and that's just all a result of the digital age. Now, it's been quite an interesting discussion, and we have spoken about revenge porn and touched on many other topics. Thank you to our viewers that have tuned in tonight. And Shaista, I'd like to thank you on behalf of British Muslim TV for joining us tonight and giving us your insight and your different angles on the topic.
Thank you for having me on.
No, thank you so much. And just to our viewers, remember you can always get in touch with us and join the discussion every week. The numbers are on the screen. At British Muslim TV, we strive to serve the community and we'll do our utmost to support you where possible. It's important for me to mention that if you are suffering any emotional distress or have been triggered or affected by today's program, you can reach out to relevant organizations for confidential advice. Full details can be found on our website, BritishMuslim.tv/support. If you are in immediate danger, please always dial 999, which is the National Emergency Service in the UK. I'll be here back on your screens again next Thursday at 9:30 p.m. with a different topic. And I want you guys to just tune into our Instagram, because that is where we have our live announcements on Instagram and Twitter. You can find us at British Muslim TV, but also SingleMuslim.com. I have a range of guests lined up and a range of topics which we will announce on there, and you can always send in your questions and comments. As always, we'd love to hear your opinion and your views on the show. And remember, you can also put forward your own thoughts on any topics you feel like are underrepresented or you would like us to speak on. Now, you can do that via social media, or you can WhatsApp us on 079 5079 7017. It's been an absolute honor hosting Shaista tonight, and I think it's a stark reminder for all of us to, get rid of fear in any possible dimension. And like Shaista reminded us, for those within British society, I know we have viewers from all over the globe, but it is important to use the full force of the law. And we are quite privileged to have access to such intersectional organizations like Muslim Women's Network, which Shaista has represented tonight, and we've previously had Shaheen Taj represent Henna Foundation. So do get in touch if you are going through this. But again, a reminder, if it's an emergency, remember, you can always call the National Emergency Line on 999. I look forward to having more discussions with you all, and I look forward to getting you involved with the guest and hearing your perspective and your opinion on the many, many topics that we'll be discussing in upcoming weeks. We are coming towards the end of the year, so keep in touch. Let us know what your New Year's resolution is, what you'd like to see from the program in the new year, and we're happy to take into consideration. Until next time, see you next week. Assalamu alaikum.
With 3 million members searching, SingleMuslim.com proudly sponsors Single Muslim Live.